Calder White rode into the flat scrub of New Mexico with the slow, tired rhythm he preferred. Dust lifted in a steady wake behind his horse. He'd been out tracking a stray head of cattle, a small, familiar chore that let him think without having to say anything. The desert around him held a kind of sacred quiet. Leather creaking, wind in the scrub, the distant cry of a hawk, until a sound, almost swallowed by the wind, snagged his attention, a thin, frightened whimper. He dismounted and followed the noise through junipers and scrub until he came to a ring of old cottonwoods. There, beneath the largest tree, a young woman hung by her wrist from a crude rope, her body limp, her feet barely brushing the dirt. Her skin was caked with dust, her hair a mess of sweat and dried blood. Above her, nailed to the trunk, was a wooden sign, letters painted in a jagged red. "White man don't forgive." Calder's stomach turned. He had no idea who had done this or why, only that she was alive and needed him. He cut the rope with his knife and caught her when she fell. She was light, fever-hot and hollowed out, her breath shallow. He eased her to the ground, dabbed at her cracked lips with water, and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She didn't answer his questions. She barely moved, but she clung to his sleeve with a weak hand. He muttered, "You got a name?" And when she gave none, called her Elena, for now, because the sound felt right. By the time he got her back to his small ranch, an honest, patched-up single-room place with a sagging barn, she was feverish and fragile. He washed the grime and dried blood from her feet, treated bruises, and bandaged the rope burns on her wrists with slow, careful motions that felt almost like prayer. He left her on the cot and took the bedroll out to the barn, telling himself it was better to sleep apart, to give her space. Truth was, he was afraid of what her presence meant, of the sign on the tree, of whoever had left it. For 3 days she spoke nothing, ate a little, watched him with wary eyes. On the 4th morning, Calder noticed a fresh boot print near the barn, angled away, military issue, cavalry. Not long after, a rider in blue and gold arrived, Lieutenant Graham from Dust Hollow, polite and sharp, carrying a folded wanted notice, a crude sketch of a young Apache woman labeled "Wanted for a murder and escape," a reward printed in bold. Calder took the paper, folded it without comment, and told the lieutenant he hadn't seen her. The man's gaze lingered, his suspicion thinly veiled. The cavalry left with a silent warning that they were searching the flats. Lena heard everything. She sat by the window, shoulders drawn in, the blanket clutched around her. Calder tried to keep the routine, beans on the stove, the small chores that shaped the day, but the quiet between them had shifted. She moved slowly, then one afternoon, stepped outside on her own for the first time. She knelt in the dirt by the barn and began to draw with a stick, a bird with wings spread and a crown of flames. It was the mark of her people. When Calder asked, she named it simply Bird in Fire, and then, halting and dry, told him the story she'd been carrying. Her band had lived quietly, trading with settlers, learning some of their ways. Then, months before, a white woman was found dead near their hunting ground. The settlers blamed the band. Soldiers and local men came, calling it justice. They burned the camp, shot her brothers, killed elders. Her mother died clutching the prayer beads a priest had given her. They hanged her father from the council pole. She hid, and when they found her, they called her a thief, a killer, tied her up and left her to die as bait. She swore she had taken nothing, done nothing, only wanted to live. Calder listened without shouting back. When she finished, the grief she'd held inside broke loose in a shuddering, wordless sob. He did not try to soothe with easy reassurances. Instead, he pressed his palm into the dirt beside her drawing, a silent witness. It was enough. She told him then her real name, Ayanna. Peaceful River, a small, steady truth she offered into the quiet. He tasted the name like a benediction and promised, without ceremony, to believe it. Slowly, trust grew between them. She began to help with small chores, to move around the ranch with less fear. On a night that had an almost domestic hush, something gentle changed hands. A kiss that began tentative and ended honest, like two people who had spent too long holding their breath, learning how to exhale. For a few days the world softened into routine. Beans, a stubborn mule, the lamplight catching on two shadowed figures. But rumors travel as fast as any rider. 3 men arrived with more swagger than law, Joe Prescott and 2 others, claiming a rumor and the bait of the reward. They wanted to come inside to look for the girl. Calder stood his ground and asked for a warrant. Prescott spat and threatened that if Calder lied, he'd burn with her. They left without forcing their way in, but the menace was clear. They'd be back and with more men. Calder buried the hateful sign in a burn pit and set it alight. No speech, just a small act of defiance. Ayanna stood near him as the wood curled and the paint blackened. The fire reflected in her eyes, something like grief, something like the possibility of release. "Thank you," she said softly. He answered just by being there. They planned to leave before the men returned, ride south, past the border toward land where people spoke different languages and the Apache could maybe be free. They left at dusk with 2 saddled horses and nothing else. For a while the desert rode with them, stars above, moonlight on the ridges. 10 miles from the border, a shot cracked the night. Calder fell from his saddle, coughing blood. Riders on the ridge opened fire, and suddenly the quiet flight became a desperate scramble. Ayanna dragged him, half carrying, into a narrow pass between cliffs, where the attackers risked losing momentum. Hidden, they held one another. He told her to go. She insisted otherwise. They made it through the gap, battered and bleeding, but alive. Time healed what time could heal. In a small lodge near a river where the border blurred into mesquite and tamarisk, Ayanna sat stitching a tiny white shirt by the window. Her belly was rounded now. A child moved beneath her hands. Calder's days were filled with training a young Mustang and tending to the small homestead. There were no trophies on the walls, no boasts, only bundles of herbs, a couple of books, and a blanket waiting for a child. They carved out a life of quiet, steady things. The river's slow current, the hush of evening, the small rituals of care. One evening, Ayanna stood in the shallows with her hands over her belly and whispered to the little life inside. Calder came up behind her, and without words their fingers braided together. "You're the only peace I've ever known," he said. An old man's truth turned to the person who had come to be his home. They watched the river flow beneath the dusk, a simple peace holding them together. If this tale of wounds, reckoning, and the strange, stubborn growth of love stayed with you, there are more stories like it. Quiet acts of courage, love that edges beyond vengeance, and lives rebuilt where the land allows it. If you'd like to hear more, consider following Wild West Love Stories for more tales of people who find something like grace in the wide, sharp places.